Hello everyone, I'm Sam Markell. I'm an extension plant pathologist and professor at NDSU, and thanks for joining me at the Devil's Lake Roundup. I am going to share my screen and talk about some disease management issues as part of the soybean production talk. Today we're going to talk about 4 diseases: soybean cyst nematode, sun death syndrome, frog eye leaf spot, and charcoal rot. Now SCNs, soybean cyst, and charcoal rot are problematic in the state, and we saw quite a lot of that. SDS and frog eye leaf spot are new to the state, and I'm a little less concerned about them, but I think it's very important that you're aware of what's going on with these diseases. So we're going to start with soybean cyst nematode. So as a reminder, this is the top yield-limiting pest in soybeans in the US. About $1 to $1.5 billion is lost annually. It's a parasitic worm, so it's a soil-borne worm, and you can see it sometimes when it forms the cysts. The cysts are just the worm full of eggs. But it infects soybean and dry bean, and it's invasive, and it's actively expanding in the US. It moves by anything that moves soil. So because it lives in the soil, if soil is moving on dirty equipment or in floods or blowing around in the winter, that will move SCN. Now it's favored by lighter soil, high pH, and dry conditions. And so we were pretty dry, and we saw some pretty high SCN numbers pop up all across the state last year. And it is also overcoming genetic resistance. We're not going to get into that right now, but that's something we will talk about in the future. So I mentioned soybean cyst is invasive. It was first found in North Carolina in the 50s. And from there was a spot that showed up in the boot heel of Missouri. And that's probably where our SCN came from. Now, once it landed in that area, over the next 50 to 60 years, it spread pretty much with soybeans wherever soybeans were grown. This is what it looked like nationally in 2020. And every one of those counties that's red has SCN. And the spots that don't have SCN, such as right here in southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, there's not a lot of soybean production. That's the Ozarks. Of course, the Appalachian Mountains are in the east. So in North Dakota, the Soybean Council has been supporting a grower-based survey for 9 years now, 8 years now. And in 2013, this started. The way it works is that growers can pick up soil sampling bags at the county office, and then they can take samples from their field, send them into AgVise, which is the lab we've been partnering with. They get their data back, and then we get enough results that we can create a map. So I'm gonna go through the map, almost 5,000 samples here, and we're gonna do it by egg level. So you can see North Dakota there. These black circles are negatives. So about 2/3 of the samples in the whole program have been negative over the years. The gray boxes, they're kind of inconclusive, right? So a lot of them are real, but some of them are not. It's very difficult to differentiate between eggs of SCN and other nematodes in the soil. So these would be kind of inconclusive, although keep in mind that a good number are positive. These green triangles would be a low-level positive, so that certainly these are real. The blue circles, the yellow squares, and the red pentagons are getting more and more and more SCN. And by the time you're getting to that yellow or red, you're going to take yield loss even on your best resistant soybean varieties. So let's look at this in a little bit different way. We're going to take away all the negatives. And so everything else here is either the gray box, which is inconclusive, or all the colored shapes, and they're definitely all positive. And you can see SCN is expanding to the north and to the west, and it's going to become important in the region here pretty soon, if it's not already. When SCN does show up, it's very difficult to tell with above ground symptoms. Usually you don't know you have it until you're taking a 15 to 30% yield hit in a spot in a field. And then when you do see it, you usually don't see it till August, and it shows up as maybe yellowed soybeans a little bit, maybe stunted. They generally don't look too bad, and it's definitely something that's not SCN specific. You can't differentiate this from a root rot or something else. This is a picture of dry edible beans, and this is also just to remind everyone that dry beans are sensitive to this. Okay, so I'm going to try to give you some resources throughout this talk. With SCN, I think the resource that's most important is the scncoalition.com, and I would encourage you to take a look at that. The coalition started because, frankly, SCN is just too big of a problem for one group, one university, one company to manage. And so the Soybean Checkoff helped with the initial funding for this, and now there's a lot of chemical companies and there's a lot of universities that are working together to try to help growers manage SCN. So one of the newer things that's been done in the last year is a series of videos called the Let's Talk Toad collection. And they're all about 2 to 3 minutes, and they're all specific for a certain question that they're answering, or topic, or region. So we have videos from Iowa, North Dakota, Missouri, Arkansas, and then some research collection videos from Georgia. And I would encourage you to take a look at them. And like I mentioned, you want to look and see how does weather impact SCN? There's a video for that. So take a look at those, and hopefully they can help answer some of your questions. Now, what I would recommend to manage SCN, the first thing is to sample to detect it. You don't need to manage it if you don't have it, but soil sampling is really, really important. And the North Dakota Soybean Council supports that sampling program. Sampling is free. You just pick up bags at the county office, send the sample in, you'll get your data back. And the Soybean Council checkoff covers the lab fees. If you already know you have it, sample to see if your management tools are working. That's particularly important once you get into the southeast part of the state. Resistant soybeans, crop rotations, and seed treatments, they all can help, and I would encourage you to dig in at the scncoalition.com. One point of note, SCN can make other diseases worse, and that's becoming an issue. So we're going to move to sudden death syndrome. And sudden death syndrome is one of those diseases that SCN makes worse. All right, so sudden death was first found in North Dakota in 2018, and it's caused by a fungal pathogen. It's another soil-borne pathogen, and it spreads when soil moves. Now, this causes a root disease, and it also produces a plant toxin. So the roots are infected, but pathogen in the roots will produce this plant toxin that will kill the plant. That's part of the reason it's called sudden death syndrome, because of the symptoms and the way and how they appear. Now, it's favored by wet springs, frequent rains, and warm temps, which we've had, at least the warm temps. It's intimately tied to SCN, and depending on where you're at or the year, it's probably the #2 to #5 yield threat in the north central US. That's not North Dakota yet, but just to let you know, this is a big deal. Okay, so we found this in 2018 in Richland County. Maybe not a surprise, a lot of SCN down there. It was moving from the south and from the east, but then in 2020, it popped up in Cavalier County. That was a surprise, and it was an unfortunate surprise. So we know we've got sudden death around. Because it's intimately tied with soybean cyst, I'm going to overlay the counties where SCN is known to occur. I would suggest that the eastern third, maybe the eastern half of the state, should be on the lookout for sudden death syndrome. Most of you don't have it, but keep your eyes on what this thing looks like when you get into the growing season, especially if you've got SCN. So you're going to start to see symptoms show up. It's these light-colored chlorotic flecks between the leaf veins. Pretty soon, those are going to expand, and the chlorosis in the middle is going to turn brown. It'll be called this dead, dying necrotic syndrome. Eventually, what happens is you're going to see that only the leaf veins remain green. When you get sudden death in there, you're going to see leaves drop like crazy, and the petioles will still remain attached. So this is one of the ways that you can tell, at least indicate, that you might have sudden death syndrome. This is a picture from Richland County in 2020, and you can see what sudden death can do. Certainly SCN is in this field as well, and they're working together. They're doing a lot of damage. The last thing I would say for diagnostics, if you are curious if you've got sudden death or you see those foliar symptoms, it's very important to take a pocket knife and take the lower stem and scratch off that outer tissue and see if that normally healthy white cortex tissue is brown, and that's an indication that you could have sudden death. Okay, with SDS management, again, the first thing is to detect it. One thing that's important about this is if you are going to bring it to somebody to try to confirm it, you have to bring the roots. A pathogen lives in the roots. Only the toxin goes up into the plant. And so a leaf sample, a stem sample, in the lab, we can't find it. It won't be there because the pathogen never grows into those plant parts. So the root ball is really important. If you have it, you want to manage SCN. Genetic resistance, if available, most of us probably don't have much yet. Some seed treatments are becoming available. The two of note that have had pretty good results are Levo and Saltro. And then I would encourage you to take a look at this YouTube video. This is something we filmed in 2020 in that same field where I took all these pictures. You can see a lot of symptoms. We'll scrape off the stem together. You'll be able to see what it looks like in the field. I'm going to also introduce you to another resource here called the Crop Protection Network. The Crop Protection Network is a website that's put together by a bunch of extension pathologists in the north central and south central US. So it's basically, we're all land grant university people trying to create a website where we can house a lot of different data. So if you go to this website, you're going to come up to the home page. You'll see corn, soybeans, and small grains. That's what the focus is. So go ahead and click on soybeans, and it'll take you to some resources, publications, webinars, a bunch of different things down here. Click on that publications, and you'll see a series of publications. There's quite a lot more here you'll be able to search about. There's a lot of information on every disease I'm talking about today, but sudden death, it's a good resource base for that. So there's information about scouting for sudden death. There's information on seed treatment research trials to see what kind of impact those chemicals have on managing it. So I'd encourage you to take a look if you're concerned about sudden death. Okay, frog-eye leaf spot is definitely new, and we should talk about it. I'm not particularly concerned in your region, but I think it's important to be aware of what this thing is and what it looks like. So it was the first officially recorded in North Dakota in 2020, and we saw it again in 2021, which is pretty surprising given how dry we are. It's caused by a fungal pathogen, and it's a leaf disease. And so this really will be the first leaf disease that can cause yield loss. I'm not convinced it's going to cause much yield loss in North Dakota, but we will see. We have to be aware of it. It's favored by warm and humid conditions. It's residue-borne and seed-borne, and it's a pretty heavy yield loss disease. It's always in the top 10 and sometimes in the top 5 in the north central and south central US. So when you see frog-eye leaf spot, you will often see these little spots on a leaf. They have a margin that's brownish, purplish, and the center is often gray. They can be different shapes. If you see that, flip that over and see if you see that gray again. When it gets humid, each one of those little spots will start to grow a gray fungal mold. Now, they don't always do this. You have to have enough humidity for the growth to occur. But if you see that, it's most likely frog-eye leaf spot. In 2020, we did a survey. As soon as we found it, the same week, the Soybean Council supported us to get out in the fields and see what was going on. And in these kind of mustard yellow colored counties, we went to 5 fields each, looking for frog eye. And in most of them, we found frog eye. And the way you would read this, let's look at Richland County here for a second. 5 of the 5 fields had frog eye. Now these lighter yellow colored counties, I'm pretty sure it was there. We just didn't get into those fields. We just ran out of daylight. You may remember we had an early freeze. So I would say it's just nipping in the edge of your region. And so it's something to be aware of. Okay, if we have it, manage it. First thing is see spots. Flip them over, look for that gray mold. Second thing is ask yourself, when does it occur? We don't see problems. People in Iowa don't see problems if it shows up late. It's really only economically important if it shows up early. So growth stages R1, R2 maybe. And if it does show up and it shows up early and it shows up in high levels, there are fungicide options. But the fungicide applications have usually been most successful at R3. And you have to have a reasonable level of disease. I don't think we're going to get there. I'd be kind of surprised if we do, but pay attention to what's going on if you see it. All right. We were also filming in a couple fields, one in Sargent County, and there's a video that you can take a look at. This is from 2020 when we first found it, and it'll give you a good look at the symptoms of frog-eye leaf spot. The last thing I'm going to cover is charcoal rot. Now, charcoal rot is something that we have seen, and when it's dry, we see a lot, and I think it's increasing. So this is pretty important. This is another soil-borne fungal pathogen. Anything that moves soil will move this as well. It loves it hot and dry, especially if you have drought stress fungus. We certainly had that last year. When you get it, it causes premature senescence and death, and it survives as these little microsclerotia. So if you're familiar with white mold and those black structures about the size of rat droppings, those are sclerotia. Imagine that, but just really, really small. That's what a microsclerotia is. This thing will infect soybeans, corn, sunflowers, and other crops, but soybeans are particularly sensitive to this, and you can have really high yield loss in dry years. So to emphasize this a little bit, I pulled up the drought monitor from late August in 2012 and 2019. So in 2012, there was a pretty good drought through much of the north central states. 2019, it was really nice. In 2012, about 1.4% of the whole crop, the soybean crop in the north central states, was lost to charcoal rot. About 60 million bushels, $850 million was lost in that year. And it's related to being really dry, especially in August. In 2019, the north central states basically lost nothing, 0.05%. So it's really intimately tied to droughts, dry, hot August in particular. So we had this show up in a big way in 2018. This was the first time that I really started to see it take off. This is a picture, north central Cass County. This is August 17th. So Berlin Nelson is the soybean pathologist who just recently retired. He went out to the field right away. You can see some damage here. And lo and behold, it's charcoal rot. And this was a bit of a surprise, but this was August 17th. So fast forward a week, so August 29th, Berlin goes in there. And this time he brings a drone crew to take some photos. And so they map this field. And so this is the field that they mapped. And you can see the green and you can see the brown. So we'll go through this a little bit. This area here in the field is just a bad spot in the field. So just ignore that. These areas in the field, these kind of yellowish, orangish areas, when you're on the ground, it looks like this. So this is August 29th. These beans are maturing. They should not be. They're going down hard. These areas of the field are the brown, dark ones. They look like this. The plants essentially are already dead by August 29th. Berlin came back another week later, so this is September 8th, and those areas that died early are basically turning black. They just look awful. So we don't know for sure how much yield loss occurred in this field, but it was very significant. And this is indicative of what charcoal rot looks like when you get a hot, dry August. It'll take these things down. It's not just drought stress. Charcoal rot is pretty hard on the beans. Excuse me. One thing that's important as you go into a field, it's starting to go down in August and it's hot, take a pocket knife and scrape off the lower part of the stem. And you can see these microsclerotia develop. So on the left photo here, you can see a nice healthy soybean in the middle, and it gets progressively worse as we go across to the left. And then really, when at the end of the season, this whole tissue on the edge of the stem will start to peel away because there's so many microsclerotia developing. And it's this charcoal black color. That's why it's called charcoal rot. So the first thing is look for it, pay attention to it. Crop rotation can help, a less sensitive variety can help, but quite frankly, we don't have a lot of tools for charcoal rot, but it's really important to see it, find it, identify it if you've got it. I'm going to leave you with one last resource. This is a soybean disease diagnostics series. Every disease I talked about today and many others are part of this booklet. You can find the booklet at the website in the yellow bar below. And then lots of times a county agent may have a physical copy, and I would encourage you to try and grab one. They're very helpful for diagnostics, just figuring out what's out in the fields. All right, well, thank you very much. And I hope that feel free to ask me any questions anytime or reach out to your local county agent and we'll do the best we can to help you. And thank you to the North Dakota Soybean Council for funding a lot of the work that we showed you today. Have a good roundup.